So for today's Dhamma talk, I was contemplating this morning on one of the questions which I received yesterday evening, and I'm going to give a talk about that question. One of the reasons why is that instead of planning out every talk which I will give on a retreat like this, I do just not plan but try to give the basic instructions of meditation leading to deep samadhi and talking about some of the problems which come up and the solutions to those problems. But also, one of the things which I like about the questions in the evening and the interviews during the day is that there I can get some feedback from you to see what type of questions are interesting to you so that I can give those talks in the next day or two. And the question which I thought was interesting, which I can elaborate on, was the question about sunyata and the practice of sunyata. But first of all, I would like to give a little anecdote about questions, because like any other Buddhist meditator, even as a young monk, I had many questions I would like to ask of the teacher. And sometimes it was hard to get even close to Ajahn Chah, but when you did ask him a question, you'd always get a wonderful answer. It may not be the answer you expected, but still it was very useful. But there was also other teachers, great teachers I knew about in Thailand at that time. It's Thailand because that's where I was living. And I could speak Thai and Lao. That was the dialect in the northeast of Thailand. And I heard of this one monk who was a very wonderful monk. His name was Ajahn Tate. And I first heard about him when I first arrived in Thailand to become a monk. I went to Thailand for one reason alone, and that was to ordain. And I still remember arriving at Bangkok airport in those days. It was only a tiny airport, and then all the Westerners who came, there was a shuttle bus which would take you into Bangkok. And all the other people on that bus, they were either tourists or business people, so they asked for different hotels. And when the bus driver asked me, "Where are you going?" I said, "To this temple in Bangkok." And I remember that because he asked again, "What hotel?" "No, I'm going to Buddhist temple." And so he kind of went blank. And then he took all the other travelers to their hotels. And then last of all, he turned around to me and said, "What hotel do you want to go to?" I said, "I'm not going to a hotel. I'm going to a temple, a monastery in Bangkok." And unfortunately, I had the invitation letter, given to me by one of the monks in the Thai temple in London. And so he read it and he looked at me and said, "That's a very big temple." I said, "Yes, please take me there." And so when I went to Bangkok, it wasn't to go to a hotel, it wasn't to see the sights, it wasn't for entertainment. It was just for one thing, to become a bhikkhu. And so that's where I started out. And little by little, you learned many things about Thailand at that time. And one thing I did learn, there was this monk, a very good meditation monk, who lived on the banks of the Mekong River in the northeast of Thailand. And he had a very good reputation. One of his reputations was he had terminal cancer. And that terminal cancer was being treated, sponsored by the King of Thailand at the time. And unfortunately, the doctors could do nothing to save him. He was terminal. And so when they told him that diagnosis, he's going to die in a short time, he said, I'd rather die in my monastery next to the Mekong River in the northeast of Thailand than die in a hospital. So they transported him back to his monastery in the northeast of Thailand, and he took another 25 years before he died. There's something there between his peace, his deep meditation, which kept him alive for so many years. He was a very, very good meditator, and he very good explanations of the Dhamma. And even though he was a famous meditator, he still lived with very, very, very few possessions. That is one of the wonderful things about seeing a monk or a nun who's a good meditator. You don't need many things which you require as a monk. Just contemplate it. You can go on alms round somewhere. Or if you sit in your room, for me anyway, people bring me delicious food every day. I always say it's quite exciting. I don't get much excitement as a monk, but sometimes I get these plates covered with aluminium foil. Haven't got a clue what's underneath. So I open up, oh, that's what I'm eating today. But anyhow, it seems you don't need very much. And that's one of the lovely reasons when you see monks who have got little and who can live, even though they may be famous, with hardly anything. And again, I'm going off on a tangent here, but it's something to do with this idea of sunyata, emptiness, because for many years I was training under Ajahn Chah. He had great meditation, very, very wise, even though he only had 4 years of education at primary school. And there was I with this big degree from Cambridge, studying under someone who just finished grade 4. Weird. But you soon realized that this monk was far wiser than I would ever be, even with all that education at top universities. But anyhow, even though he did sort of show some psychic powers and deep wisdom, I was always a little bit wondering, was this monk fully enlightened or not? Because they will not tell you. If you ask them and they say they are, then you know they're not. If you understand what I mean. That's why, just to let you know, how would anyone claim to be enlightened, fully enlightened, an arahat? And I love this passage from the suttas, that this monk went to see the Buddha, and the Buddha's attendant, Ananda, was sitting next to the Buddha. He was his attendant. And this monk came up to the Lord Buddha and said, a person who is fully enlightened never thinks they're better than anybody else, never thinks they're worse than anybody else, never thinks they're the same as anybody else. And the Buddha said, yes, correct. So the monk bowed and left. And a short while later, another monk came to see the Buddha and said exactly the same. The one who is enlightened never thinks they're better than anybody else, never thinks they're worse than anybody else, and never thinks they're the same as anybody else. Correct, said the Lord Buddha. When that monk bowed and left, then the Lord Buddha turned around to Ananda and said, that's how new enlightened beings, arahats, that's how they come and tell me and assure me that they have understood and their attainment, I can't really call it that, their state of arahat is valid. you never ever would think you're better, worse, or the same as anybody. It's like you vanished, disappeared, no one left. How can you say that a nobody is better, worse, or the same as others? So, this particular monk, everybody said he was fully enlightened. And anyway, when I decided I wanted to go and see him and ask questions, just like many of you might, come to my room or, ask me questions, not sure of what attainment, what wisdom I have. But nevertheless, I went there and I had to basically make an appointment. He was just so well known, you could not just walk in. So I made an appointment. I had to wait for a couple of days before my turn came up. And when I was waiting, there was this Malaysian lady. She went in before me, and I could hear the conversation. She was talking about her meditation. And when she was talking about her meditation, she said, when I was meditating, my mind went so blank I could not experience the breath anymore. That was fourth jhana, wasn't it? And Ajahn Chah said, no, that's not fourth jhana. And then she said again, when I was meditating, everything disappeared and went blank. That's the fourth jhana, isn't it? I said, no. And many times he said, no, no, no. And then she said, when you get fourth jhana, you can't perceive anything. And Ajahn Tate said, bleh. And then she came out with a big smile on her face. Ajahn Tate has confirmed my attainment of fourth jhana. He said, ugh. And that taught me one lesson, that sometimes people want these attainments, achievements, whatever they think they're calling them, so much that, just the monk has to smile at them. Think, that's confirmation, I'm an arahat. Of course it's not, it's called wishful thinking. Be careful of that. But anyway, when I went into Ajahn Tate's room next, I've been working out these questions for a long time. But then a very strange thing happened. As soon as I went into the room and into the presence of this great monk, my mind felt so peaceful. I was the way I describe it, blasted with beautiful loving kindness, really powerful. My mind went so peaceful, all the questions evaporated. There was no more questions to ask. And I felt very stupid, having waited all these days. And I was sitting in front of this great monk, and I thought, I'm wasting his time. I've got to say something. So what I said is, it's probably better that we find the answer to the questions ourselves. He said, yes, well done. And I was thinking something else to say, because I didn't want to leave. The next thought which came up, when you're in the presence of a great master like that, I said, you'll have to drag me out. I'm not leaving, I'm staying. You felt so embraced, acknowledged, accepted, so at peace. And that answered more questions than anything I could put down in words. And that's one of the reasons also, I will answer all your questions, but there will be some questions which will not have time to find an answer. Don't worry. The real answers come from a different place. You answer one question, and then I'm asked another question. You give an answer to that, and there's another question. And the questions keep going on and on and on and on for some. That is like papancha. Is it really answering what you really want to know? So that's one of the reasons why that I do answer questions to the best of my ability, but there will always be more questions afterwards until a person realizes, that many of those questions are coming from a restless mind. When the mind is still and peaceful, these questions don't exist. It's like you don't need the questions. You don't need to think the Dhamma. You see the Dhamma. And that's a very good introduction to the talk on sunyata. One of the things which, when I thought I might give a talk on this, I started remembering when I first read the Sunyata Sutta. I think it's called the Mahasunyata Sutta. I'm not really remember too clearly. But I remember reading that how it was described by the Buddha and how he said it should be practiced was stage by stage by stage by stage. First of all, he said that you monks who are here in this forest should begin by noticing that in this forest there's no sounds of chariots or people. That has disappeared. You've walked away from that. That something is missing. And this is just going to a quiet place. And then when you close your eyes, then the other thing which is not there is all these sights of people, birds, monks, trees waving in the wind. That's also not there. It's free of that, empty of that. And the Sunyata Sutta keeps on going on like this. When you've got your eyes closed, then soon, you're aware of your body, but then the body becomes tranquil. When it becomes tranquil, it disappears. And you're aware of the emptiness of this experience. The emptiness from your body. The body's not there. And it's such a long time since I read that Mahasunyata Sutta, and it kind of brought a smile to my face that during this retreat I've been encouraging each one of you. The deeper you get into your meditation states, don't just look at what's there. Don't just contemplating, I've got the beautiful breath now, I've got a nimitta, I've got the stable nimitta. No. How about noticing what's missing, what's gone, what's not there? And then you're practicing the Sunyata Sutra as the Buddha taught it. Because when you see what's actually there, what you've attained, what you've got, that just encourages this idea of a self who achieves things, who owns things. When you see what's missing, what you don't own, you can't own what's missing, it's gone. That encourages you to actually to disappear more. The Sunyata Sutta is very, very helpful to break through to the understanding of anatta, of non-self. And I like that teaching of anattas very, 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 very much. And it's also fun. Some of you know that when I give talks, I try to make them interesting by telling stories that emphasize these teachings of the Dhamma. And some of those stories are adaptations from what's in the suttas or in places like the Dhammapada. But many of these stories come from my own experience. And I'm not sure if I told this story at the beginning of this retreat. Please forgive me if I did. But this is not the only retreat I've done recently. Even when I go back to Perth, people say, oh, have a good rest. Yeah, sure. Because as soon as I go back to the monastery where I live, there's more teachings to do. I arrive back Wednesday afternoon, Wednesday evening, another talk. for the monks and everybody else. Friday, another talk. Saturday, another talk. Sunday, we're celebrating our Wesak. And the week after, another retreat, this time over in Thailand. So please forgive me. I give so many talks. I'm not quite sure what I said 6 days ago, what I said 7 days ago at another venue. But anyway, this is what happened to me when I decided that I should get one of these healthcare cards from the Australian government. It was called a seniors healthcare card. If you're over 65, you can get this little card, which means you can get free healthcare, cheap medicines, and many other advantages if you fall ill. My main trouble is these days I don't fall ill. Ever since I got this card, I've never used it. But nevertheless, I thought, why not? You never know, the future's uncertain. So you went online, computers, that was the main advantage. You don't have to go anywhere, just click a few buttons and you get this healthcare card. But it wasn't as easy as I thought. Because they said in Western lands these days, there's a phenomenon called identity fraud. That sometimes people try and steal, your name and who you are. I don't know why anybody would want to steal the name of Ajahn Brahm. You don't need to steal it, just ask for it and I'll give it to you for free. And you'll have to go and give all the talks. No, so they said, I can't do this online. I have to go into the nearest government office and have an interview and prove who I was. So I arranged the interview. I went up there and I was sitting at a desk in front of this senior government official, and she said, can you prove who you are? And my reply, I think you know my character. I said, I've been a monk at that time for about 45 years. For 45 years I've been trying to find out who I am, and I haven't found out yet. I actually said that. She didn't think it was funny. She said, I've got a job to do. You've got to prove who you are. Okay. And she said, what ID have you got? What identification? Have you got your driver's license? Driver's license? I'm a monk. I don't drive a car. Okay. Have you got your credit card? Credit card? I don't even have a bank account. I'm a monk. Sometimes I'm always a bit concerned. In many places where you go, sometimes they will ask you, do you have enough money or enough of an account to look after yourself while you're visiting Sri Lanka? I'm glad they never asked me that question, because I would say, no, I've got no money. I come into Sri Lanka as a vagrant, a wandering monk, as someone who's got no money at all, as a beggar. Fortunately, Sri Lanka understands that, but many countries don't. And so I said, no, I've got no credit card, I've got no bank account. I said, oh, what about your rental agreement where you live? And you have to have this piece of paper, a contract with the person who owns your house or owns your apartment. I said, I live in a cave. I do. I said, I've got no certificate of ownership. I don't pay any rent to my monastery. I just stay there. And then she said, that's no good. And then the next thing she asked me, honestly, she asked me, have you got your marriage certificate? I couldn't help laughing. Like, I'm a monk, I don't get married. Oh. And then she went through this other list of things which can prove you exist. I didn't have any of them. And then she looked up at me, quite frustrated, and said, according to the Australian government, you don't exist. You know what I said? I couldn't resist it. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. The Buddha was right. And that's true. But it does make things very difficult to get stuff from governments. So anyway, sort of I did have a passport. And he said, oh, I'm not really supposed to accept this, but okay, I will. And so I got my senior's healthcare card. I've never used it, but it was fun to get. So you're empty of so many of these things which actually define you. So if I interviewed you, who are you? Can you prove who you are? What would you say? And if you're honest, you will start to realize that all of these certificates, pieces of paper, which are supposed to convince government officials especially that you exist, even your name. As a monk, when we ordain, we actually change our names. Now my name is, on my passport now, is Bhikkhu Brahmavamso. I was born Peter Betts. So sometimes when they ask, where's Peter gone? He's gone. Even though that was my name a long time ago. But you change your name to a monk's name, because that's what people know me by, that's how it's used. Sometimes, again, people call me Ajahn Brahm, because that's the pen name on the books which I write. When I said to you that I'm afraid that if that Zen monk is right, that I have to do next 7 lifetimes as a donkey, that's Ajahn Brahm, not Bhikkhu Brahmavamso. That's where I can get out. Actually, there's a funny story about that. Please excuse me for telling funny stories, but I will get onto the serious stuff afterwards, I promise. And that's one of the monks in Bodhinyana Monastery. He was from the Punjab, an Indian monk, Sikh, by his family was Sikh. But he's a really good Buddhist monk. And he told me a story that in his village, in the Punjab state of India, that every man is called Mr. Singh and every woman is called Mrs. Kaur. It's just a tradition there. So with the same second name, so often people have very, very similar names. So what happened, there was one woman, elderly woman, who passed away. She died in the morning, and the doctors came and said that she really is dead. It may be a village, but there's very well trained doctors. And so they decided they needed to do the funeral service for her. And in that part of India, maybe because it's so hot, they need to do the cremation, the same day. Otherwise the body might sort of decay, go off and become very smelly. So they got, the funeral pyre made. They did all the ceremonies, but before they lit the fire, she woke up. She came to life again. And that surprised everybody. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but it sometimes happens. I remember a Thai disciple said that happened in her village in Thailand. The person who was dead and they were doing the funeral chanting for had all these monks doing the funeral chants, and then the person in the coffin came alive. And the first people who ran out the hall were the monks. They were scared. But anyway, this particular woman, when she came to, she told the story, what happened, her near-death experience. She said when she died, only temporarily, that she was taken by these 2 spirits. This is how she described it. I'm not going to explain this. taken by these two spirits and dragged to this big hall where there's like a boss spirit, one in charge. And this boss spirit told these two smaller spirits, "You've got the wrong Mrs. Kaur. She's not supposed to die yet, you stupid spirits." And they scolded these two spirits. This is true story. It may sound funny, but life is funny. And so they had to bring her back. So they brought her back, and that's when she woke up. And then a few minutes later, another Mrs. Kaur died. This time they got the right one. And so when I told that story in Bodhinyana Monastery, I said, you better be careful, because you know Ajahn Brahm, there's also another monk with a very similar name, Ajahn Brahmali. So if one of us dies, wait a while, they may have got the wrong one. But anyway, let's go back to something more serious. The emptiness. Are you your name? Is that who you are? And isn't it wonderful? I always think it's great if I can stop being Ajahn Brahm for a while. And of course, I've tried to do that and sometimes achieved not being Ajahn Brahm. Like when I was at a conference in Hanoi, in Vietnam, a Buddhist conference. And at that conference, one of the things I like about going to conferences, number one, people ask you questions. They challenge you, which is a great thing to challenge monks. Please don't think that if you ask a tough question of a monk, that's disrespectful. It's respectful to the Vinaya, respectful to the Dhamma. If you ask a question, then you may get a wonderful answer. So anyway, I love conferences because sometimes people ask you tough questions. Welcome. And number two, because I can sit in the back and listen to other monks give a talk. For the whole time I've been in Sri Lanka, I've never listened to another monk give a talk. Only me. That's a bit unfair. I'd love to listen to, say, Venerable Dhamma give a talk. Or somebody else give a talk. But anyway, I realise that's what I'm here for, so I give talks. But at conferences, you can't give talks all the time. So on this occasion, I was sitting in the back, waiting for these other monks to give the presentations. And as I was sitting in the back, this young Vietnamese Theravada monk came and sat next to me. And this young Vietnamese monk, the reason he sat next to me was because he wanted to practice his English. He wasn't interested in what the monks were teaching on the stage. He just saw this Western monk and wanted to practice English. So he started talking to me. Where are you from? And I replied, I am from Australia. Oh, he said, Australia. In Australia, do you know a monk called Ajahn Brahm? I'm well known in Vietnam as well as other countries. You know that book, which many of you have read, the Mindfulness, Bliss and Beyond? That was so popular in Vietnam that is now in the universities as compulsory reading for people training to become monks and nuns. That's how well regarded it was. So he'd seen that book, he'd seen that name, so he said, do you know Ajahn Brahm? And I replied, I know him very well. Oh really? What's he like? Just like me. I am Ajahn Brahm. And he was shocked. Ah, he said. But anyway, that was just a little bit of fun. Disappearing and not being who people think you are. So anyway, who are you? All those things which you define yourself by, all those things which you take as your identity, you know for a fact that those things aren't really truly you. And when you are meditating, you can let go of that. That's not who I am. All your knowledge, all of your so-called attainments, is that who you are? Now that's important, because sometimes when you meditate, you are imprisoned by your past. You think, I can't do breath meditation. That's not the truth of the matter. What you're really saying, I've tried breath meditation before, but I have not yet been able to do it. When you think you can't do it, you've imprisoned yourself. When you think that I could only sit for an hour, you've imprisoned yourself again. You don't know how long you will sit for in your next meditation. So let all those past judgments, descriptions about yourself and your abilities disappear. You can imagine what it must have been like for those monks and nuns in the time of the Buddha. I remember this one nun, bhikkhuni. For 7 years she hadn't got any peace in her meditation at all. And then these great teachers came along, and within a few days she was fully enlightened. Sometimes, if you think you can't do it, and that very thought, that attachment to a view about yourself, stops you. If any of you think these nimittas, yes, they may be for these meditators who spend their whole life meditating, but for me, I've tried nimittas, it doesn't work. What you mean is it hasn't worked yet. Keep that option of success open. You can very easily stop yourself by having this identity crisis, to think you can't do these things. You tried before, it hasn't worked. Please don't believe in that. I'm also going to be very challenging now. Now, there are some people who've had cancers, stage 4, ready to die. If you believe that sentence, of course you will die. There's others who for some reason or another do not believe that sentence. And that gives recovery an opportunity to occur. Not everybody recovers, but I've just seen too many people who should have been dead years ago, still alive. The cancer's in remission. Doctors can't understand why. Why am I saying that? Because if you take on even that identity, that I've got stage 4 cancer, I'm going to die, even that will be a cause for your death. You're not giving yourself a chance. You're not allowing the fact that, that this idea, this diagnosis is an approximation. It's not precise. One of the stories, again, there was this Englishman, and he was from Lancashire. And because, again, he was an old man, he would smoke cigarettes when he was young. he had the lung cancer. And so when he went to the doctors, they were trying to give him something to cure his cancer, but nothing worked. And in the end, in places like Australia, somebody who's dying, when the doctors give up on him, they send him to what they call a hospice. In a hospice, they give palliative care, just drugs and medicine to relieve the pain, but not to cure the disease. They've given up trying to cure the disease. They're just trying to keep him comfortable in his last few days. And because his son-in-law used to be a monk, they asked me to visit him, which I did, and that's actually where he told me. The first day he was in this hospice, the nurse asked him what he wanted for dinner that evening. And then he told the nurse he has high cholesterol, so he can't have anything oily. He's got diabetes, so he can't have anything sugary. He's got hardened arteries, he can't have anything salty. And all these list of things he can't eat. And the nurse, the Australian nurse, looked at him and said, Ted, which was his name, Ted, you're not going to die of a heart attack. You're not going to die of diabetes. You're going to die of cancer in about 3 or 4 days. You can eat whatever you want. The cancer's going to kill you, not the excess sugar or oil. And apparently Ted's eyes widened. What? You mean I can eat what I like? Yes, said the nurse. So he ordered all these sweet and oily and full of cholesterol foods his wife had never let him eat in years. And he enjoyed them immensely. Why bother? He's going to die in a few days. But what happened? True story. Because he was enjoying himself so much, his cancer went into remission. Honestly. He walked out of that hospice and went home. 6 months later, he died properly, but he had an extra 6 months because there's something in your health, which is your state of mind, your joy, your positivity. That is also really important. Do you really have cancer? Do you really have high cholesterol? Who has it? Is it your body or what? It's one of the wonderful things about when you realize non-self and emptiness. What actually do you have? What do you own? A lot of time I'm going off on a tangent to non-self. Sometimes people have a very difficult job really understanding what anatta means. But it's one of the sayings of the Buddha is when you have a sense of self, you have things which belong to you, what you own. When you don't have anything you own, your sense of self vanishes. Sometimes you know a thing by what it does, its function. The function of your identity, sense of self, is to own, possess things, and to control them. That's one of the reasons, one of my favorite suttas of the Buddha, I'm sure you appreciate this as well, is the Anatta Sutta. And I often let people know that when I did my 6 months solitary retreat, where I never spoke to anybody for 6 months, never saw anybody, no human being, I kept that chanting the Anatta Sutta every day. I knew it was important, and when I chanted it, I also was contemplating it. In the Pali, because the Pali was far more accurate. And then all the things which it said about, this body. If the body really did, this Rupakanda, if it really did belong to you, You'd be able to tell this body to be like this, to be like that. But it never does that for you. It'd be wonderful to say, may my body have full energy right now. I don't want to go to sleep. But you can't do that. May my body be healthy. I'm on a retreat. I don't want to have these back pains or other pains. This is a great opportunity. Listen to Dhamma. Can you control your body like that? Of course you can't. And the Buddha was kept on saying that's a proof that you don't own the body. If you did own the body, you could tell it what to do. But the body belongs to nature, not to you. Vedana. Wouldn't it be wonderful if you owned Vedana? Any time I had an unpleasant Vedana, I'd say, get out of here. I'm in control. But you're not. Which is why whenever unpleasant Vedana comes, it's here. You can't control it. Perceptions. Will. I never actually gave a talk too much about will yet. Maybe to do that this afternoon, I don't know, see what happens. But is your will, does it belong to you? Are you the one who decides what to do? Sankhara, one of the major parts of Sankhara Khandha is will. Volitional intentions, whatever it is. So you soon find that your volitional tendencies don't come from you. Sometimes I wondered, why did I speak like this? Where did this simile come from? And a lot of the times when I look back, I can find I heard that from, say, Ajahn Chah, or I read that in the suttas. It's not me. I can trace back where that will came from. Can you control your will? Try it. You will fail. It's not yours. Not me, not mine, not a self. And your consciousnesses. Did you notice that every time I say consciousnesses, it's always in the plural? 6 different types of consciousness. Which one is yours? Which one do you control? A lot of times, this is what the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta is saying. It doesn't belong to you. It's not you. It's not yours. It's not a self. The second one, it's not yours. You don't own it. You don't even own your own consciousness is. So what do you own? Nothing. That's scary, but it's also liberating. So when you're meditating, if you really can accept that and understand that without fear, the meditation becomes very, very easy. You're not giving up anything that you own. You didn't own it anyway. Your body, pretty simple to understand. You don't own your body, you can let it go. All your thoughts, are they really your thoughts? When people say they're bothered by their thoughts in meditation, please investigate your thoughts. Be a little bit sort of objective about the thoughts. And you'll discover that just nearly all your thoughts are rubbish. They're like spam on a computer. They've got no real worthwhile value. When you realize how valueless are your thoughts, let them go. They deserve to let go. So it's very easy. You don't need to keep your thoughts. You don't need to write them in a big book. This is the greatest thoughts of the age. No, the thoughts are usually pretty rubbishy. So you can let them go. They don't belong to you. When you get things like silence, Does that belong to you? How can you say it belongs to you? It's not there. Silence is empty. It's sunyata. One of the things which are empty. It's empty of vitaka, of conceptions. But then when you do have this silence in the mind, there's something which is being aware of that silence. Now that's good to focus on, because when the thoughts disappear, you got to that degree of emptiness, empty of all thoughts. And that is beautiful. But then to be that person who tries to control that, you don't own the silence. If you have this idea you own things, once you own something, you'll always be controlling of it. That's the problem. And then the silence disappears. And you're doing something again. Even the joy of meditation, if you think, now I've got it, you never get anything. You're just visiting. You don't own the joy in meditation. If you think you own it, you will try and control it, and you get upset when it vanishes. These things are not me, not mine, not a self. You don't own them. And then when you don't own these things, it's much easier to enjoy them. Have you enjoyed this retreat center in Bandarawela? Do you own this retreat center? Are you responsible for it? Have you ever noticed, as a monk, a lot of times you can get much better meditation in somebody else's monastery than the one you own? And the reason is because it's somebody else's monastery, you're just visiting. You don't own it. It's not yours. That should be, ideally, how monks and nuns live. You can go from monastery to monastery, arama to arama, cave to cave. You don't own it. You're only visiting. You're free. It's not yours. Just staying there for a night. Maybe many nights over many years, but always perceiving just for one night. Then you have the idea you don't own anything. And it's much more beautiful when you don't own it. Of course, I mentioned that before, I think in the talk. I mentioned it to Venerable Dhamma, that every Monday morning when I go back to the monastery in which I live, on Monday mornings I'm not the boss. I'm visiting. And the first time I did that, pretended I was a visitor rather than an abbot, rather than the hamdro, the head monk. Have I got that right? Is hamdro head monk or just any monk? Any monk. What do you call the boss, the head monk of the monastery? What, Quandro? Loka hamdro. My goodness, Loka means the world. Big, okay. Am I appropriate to being a Loka hamdro? But anyway, this is not my tummy. I don't own it. I'm only visiting. But anyway, being a visitor, that meant I could enjoy the monastery in which I lived without always having to be responsible for it. You could be at peace with it. You don't really own it. When you don't own it, you can find some peace. I wanted to tell this story. I don't know if this is the right time, but one of my favorite monks in Thailand, he was very old when I first went there. He was a very brilliant monk. He was a Loka Hamdro. And eventually he was actually like second in line to become the most senior monk in Thailand, the Sangaraja they used to call it, the Mahanayaka. And then the third in line was jealous of him. So he recorded many of his talks, cut and pasted those talks, and accused him of being a communist, which in Thailand was against the law at that time, and had a trial. And this monk was convicted of being a communist. So even though he was such a senior monk, he was put in jail for 2 years, a jail in Bangkok. When he wrote his autobiography, he said that was the best 2 years of his life, being in jail. He could meditate as much as he wanted, catch up on his reading, write a few memoirs. He had enough food to eat, and the cell was comfortable enough. He was a simple monk. He's had a wonderful time, the best 2 years of his life. And he was sincere about that. Sometimes I think maybe I'm so busy. But anyhow, that showed he didn't worry at all about his reputation. Eventually something happened and they realized the monk who had actually basically set him up to try and get rid of him, and that he was later released from jail. And he just went back to his monastery, but he didn't actually want to be a head monk anymore. He enjoyed it so much just being a simple monk. A very great monk. He didn't own anything. That's one of the reasons why the sunyata, when things disappear, you don't own them. You don't own your meditation experiences. They teach you. You don't keep, I am a jhana lobby. I have jhanas. You don't always have jhanas. Sometimes, you have to eat. You're not in jhana when you eat. These jhanas are temporary. You can let go so much that they're just there for you. Things disappear. You didn't own them anyway. You don't own the jhanas. You don't own your wisdom. It's not what you own. It's showing that so much perceptions which are not correct have vanished, have disappeared. It's an emptiness, sunyata, not an attainment. If it's an attainment, something solid, it's anicca, it can disappear. If it's nothing, then of course it stays. Nothing cannot disappear. It's always underneath everything. It's one of the reasons why sunyata, when you focus on it, it can take you into the deepest of meditations. No body, no thought, no breath, no nimittas, nothing. The mind stops. When is Ajahn Chah going to stop? When am I going to stop? Said that novice. He stopped. He vanished. Sunyata. Okay. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.